They say pride comes before the fall. But for Caleb Sterling, the fall wasn't just a stumble, it was a demolition. He thought he had committed the perfect crime, hiding $10 million in offshore accounts, hiring the city's most ruthless shark of a lawyer, and leaving his quiet, devoted wife Shra with absolutely nothing. He was celebrating his freedom at a high-end bar, toasting to a new life with his mistress, convinced the ink on the divorce decree was already dry. But Caleb forgot one crucial rule of war: never underestimate the enemy you think is weak. He didn't know who Sarah really was until the courtroom doors swung open and the man walking through them made the judge himself stand up in fear. This is the story of how a greedy husband lost everything in a single second. The ice cubes clinked softly against the crystal of the heavy tumbler, swirling an 18-year-old Macallan Scotch. Caleb Sterling raised the glass to the dim amber light of the gilded cage, one of Manhattan's most exclusive lounges. "To freedom," he announced, his voice smooth, carrying the rich baritone of a man who was used to giving orders in boardrooms. Beside him, Jessica Vane giggled, leaning her head on his shoulder. She was 24, sharp-featured and ambitious. Everything Caleb had convinced himself his wife Sarah was not. Jessica ran a finger down the lapel of his $3,000 bespoke suit. "Are you sure it's over, Caleb?" "Like really over?" Caleb smirked, taking a slow sip. "Jessica, darling, tomorrow is just a formality. The prenup is ironclad. My lawyer, Richard Salling, has buried Sarah in so much paperwork, she probably doesn't even know what day it is. She's getting the Corolla and her grandmother's china. I'm keeping the penthouse, the Hamptons estate, and the portfolio." He didn't mention the accounts in the Cayman Islands. He didn't mention the shell company Orion Holdings, which technically owned his luxury cars. As far as the court knew, Caleb Sterling was a successful executive having a bad year. As far as the court knew, he was barely scraping by. "She never stood a chance," Caleb continued, setting the glass down. She's soft. She's a homemaker. She thinks the world runs on kindness and baking cookies. She doesn't understand that the world runs on leverage." "I almost feel bad for her," Jessica said, though her smile suggested otherwise. "Almost. Don't be. She's a leech," Caleb said, his face hardening. 5 years I supported her. 5 years of her charity work and her quiet dinners. She bored me to death. I need someone with fire, someone who matches my altitude." He checked his Rolex Daytona. It was nearly midnight. "One more drink, then I need to get some sleep. I want to be fresh when I see the look on her face tomorrow. Salling is going to petition for legal fees, too. I want her to leave that courtroom owing me money." Across the bar, a man in a dark trench coat was nursing a club soda. He hadn't looked up from his phone the entire time Caleb was speaking. But as Caleb laughed a loud, barking sound of total victory, the man in the trench coat tapped a button on his phone screen. The message was sent. "Target is confident. No suspicion. Proceed with Phase 2. Caleb paid the tab, leaving a lavish tip to show off to the bartender, and walked out into the cool New York air, his arm around Jessica. He felt untouchable. He felt like a king who had just conquered a kingdom without suffering a single scratch. He had no idea that the kingdom was about to collapse on top of him. The morning sun hit the steps of the New York State Supreme Court with a blinding glare. It was 8:55 a.m. Caleb strode toward the entrance, flanked by Richard Salling. Salling was a legend in divorce court, a man known as the Butcher of Broadway. He was short, bald, and aggressive, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's cars. "Keep your mouth shut today, Caleb," Salling advised, checking his briefcase. "Let me do the talking. We're going to paint her as incompetent. We're going to imply she was unfaithful just to rattle her. If she cracks on the stand, the judge will sign whatever we put in front of him." "She won't crack," Caleb said dismissively. "She'll just cry. That's all she does." They entered courtroom 4B. The air was stale, smelling of floor wax and old wood. Sarah was already there. She sat at the defendant's table, looking smaller than Caleb remembered. She wore a simple grey cardigan and a skirt that had seen better days. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, highlighting the pale, tired skin of her face. She kept her eyes fixed on the table. Next to her sat her lawyer, a man Caleb didn't recognize. He was young, perhaps 30, with messy hair and a suit that looked like it had been bought off the rack at a department store. He was fumbling with a stack of disorganized papers, dropping a pen as Caleb walked in. Caleb leaned over to Salling. "Who is that clown? I thought she hired legal aid." Salling squinted. "Never seen him. Probably some strip mall ambulance chaser she found in the phone book. This is going to be a slaughter, Caleb. Try not to laugh while court is in session." "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. The Honorable Judge Harold P. Grimshaw swept into the room. Grimshaw was an old-school judge, impatient, stern, and known for hating time-wasters. He sat down, adjusting his glasses, and glared at the room. "Docket number 4921, Sterling v. Sterling," the clerk announced. "Appearances," Judge Grimshaw grunted. "Richard Salling for the plaintiff, Caleb Sterling." Salling said, his voice booming with confidence. James Miller. For the defendant, Sarah Sterling." The young lawyer stammered, standing up halfway before sitting back down nervously. Caleb suppressed a smirk. It was pathetic. "All right." Judge Grimshaw sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mr. Salling, I've reviewed the motions. You're claiming the prenuptial agreement bars Mrs. Sterling from spousal support, and you're claiming sole ownership of the marital assets due to... What is this gross financial negligence on her part?" "Correct, Your Honor," Salling said, buttoning his jacket and stepping into the aisle. He moved like a predator. "Sarah Sterling contributed zero financial value to this marriage. In fact, she was a drain. My client, a high-ranking executive at Ascendant Global, built his fortune through blood, sweat, and tears. Mrs. Sterling spent her days gardening and volunteering at animal shelters. We have bank statements showing she cannot manage a simple checking account. To award her half of Mr. Sterling's hard-earned success would be a miscarriage of justice." Caleb watched Sarah. She didn't move. She didn't defend herself. She just stared at her hands. "God, she's weak," he thought. "I should have done this years ago." "Mr. Miller." The judge looked at the young lawyer. "Do you have a rebuttal?" James Miller stood up, shuffling his papers. "Your Honor, we contest the validity of the prenup." Salling laughed out loud. "On what grounds? I wrote that prenup myself. It's bulletproof." "On the grounds of fraudulent inducement," Miller said, his voice shaking slightly. And undisclosed assets." Caleb froze. His heart skipped a single beat. "Undisclosed assets." Salling waved a hand dismissively. "Ridiculous. My client has disclosed every penny. This is a stalling tactic, Your Honor. I move for an immediate ruling." "Not so fast," Judge Grimshaw said, narrowing his eyes. "Mr. Miller, that is a serious accusation." "Do you have proof?" Miller looked at Sarah. Sarah looked up for the first time. Her eyes weren't wet with tears. They were cold, clear, and terrifyingly calm. "We do, Your Honor," Miller said, his voice suddenly losing its stutter. He stood up straighter. "But the evidence is complex and given the sensitive nature of the financial structures involved, specifically regarding Ascendant Global, we have asked a character witness to provide context." "A character witness?" Caleb scoffed, whispering to Salling, who her knitting circle leader. "We don't have time for character witnesses in a financial hearing," Judge Grimshaw snapped. "Who is this witness?" Miller smiled. It was a sharp, predatory smile that didn't match his rumpled suit. "The witness is the chairman of the board for Ascendant Global, Your Honor." Caleb frowned. The chairman. The chairman of Ascendant was a ghost. No one ever saw him. Caleb was a vice president, and even he had never met the owner. The company was owned by a private trust. "The chairman?" Judge Grimshaw asked, skeptical. "And he is here?" "He is," Miller said. He turned toward the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom. The room went silent. The doors groaned as they were pushed open. Two large men in dark suits stepped in, first security. Real security. Then an older man walked in. He was leaning on a cane with a silver wolf's head handle. He wore a charcoal three-piece suit that whispered old money. His hair was white, swept back, and his face was lined with the kind of authority that commanded armies. Caleb's blood turned to ice. He knew that face. He had seen it in the oil paintings in the lobby of his office building. He had seen it in the business textbooks he studied in college. It was Arthur Bennett, the billionaire tycoon, the Lion of Wall Street. Caleb looked at his wife, Sarah. Bennett. He had never made the connection. Bennett was a common last name. He thought she was a nobody, from Ohio. Arthur Bennett walked down the center aisle, the cane clicking rhythmically against the floor. He didn't look at the judge. He didn't look at the lawyers. He looked straight at Caleb, and for the first time in his life, Caleb Sterling felt truly, violently afraid. "Arthur Bennett," Judge Grimshaw said, his voice losing its gruff edge, replaced by shock. "To what do we owe this honor?" Arthur stopped at the railing. He looked at Sarah, and his hard expression melted into warmth. "I'm here for my daughter, Judge," Arthur said, his voice deep and gravelly. Then he turned his eyes back to Caleb. "And to meet the man who thought he could steal from her." Caleb felt the blood drain from his face so fast it made him dizzy. He gripped the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles turning white. "Daughter." The word echoed in his skull like a gunshot. He looked at Sarah. She was still sitting there, hands folded, but the posture was different now. It wasn't submission. It was patience. The patience of a spider waiting for a fly to stop struggling in the web. "Objection!" Richard Salling shouted, though his voice lacked its earlier bravado. He stood up, smoothing his tie nervously. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Mr. Bennett is not a party to this divorce. His relationship to the defendant is irrelevant to the division of marital assets. This is courtroom theatrics, designed to prejudice the proceedings." Judge Grimshaw looked over his spectacles at Salling. "Mr. Salling, you spent the last 20 minutes characterizing the defendant as a financial burden with no connections and no resources. If her father is one of the wealthiest men in the Western Hemisphere, that characterization is factually incorrect. I will allow it. Mr. Bennett, please take the stand." Arthur Bennett handed his cane to one of his security guards and ascended the witness stand. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace. He didn't look like an old man. He looked like an old warrior. "State your name for the record," the clerk said, her voice trembling slightly. "Arthur William Bennett," he said, "Chairman and CEO of Ascendant Global." James Miller, Sarah's lawyer, who suddenly didn't look like a fumbler anymore, but rather like a man holding a royal flush, stepped forward. "Mr. Bennett," Miller began, "could you explain to the court your relationship with the defendant, Sarah Sterling?" "Sarah is my only child," Arthur said, his eyes locking on to Caleb. "5 years ago, she came to me. She told me she had met a man, a young, ambitious executive working in one of my satellite divisions. She said she was falling in love." Caleb swallowed hard. He remembered meeting Sarah. It was at a fundraising gala for the city zoo. He had gone there to network with potential clients. She had been standing by the silent auction wearing a simple dress. He had approached her because she looked safe, manageable. He thought she was a low-level coordinator. "I warned her," Arthur continued, his voice dropping an octave. "I told her that men like Caleb Sterling don't love women. They love status. They love objects. But she has a good heart. She wanted to believe in him. She wanted to know if he loved her, not the Bennett billions." "So what did you do?" Miller asked. "We made an agreement," Arthur said. "She would use her mother's maiden name. She would live simply. She would cut herself off from the family trust for the duration of the courtship and the marriage. She wanted to build a life from scratch. She wanted to be a partner, not a meal ticket." Caleb closed his eyes. The small apartment we lived in for the first 2 years. The used car she drove. The way she budgeted for groceries. He had mocked her for it. He had called her cheap. He had told Jessica that his wife had a poverty mindset. It wasn't poverty. It was a test, and he had failed. "For 5 years," Arthur said, his voice tightening with suppressed rage. "I watched from the shadows. I watched this man treat my daughter like a servant. I watched him ignore her on her birthday, to go on business trips. I watched him criticize her clothes, her cooking, her intelligence, and I honored my daughter's wish to stay out of it, because she believed he would change." Arthur leaned forward, the microphone picking up the harsh rasp of his breath. But then came the infidelity. And now this attempt to leave her destitute. Arthur let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "You stood here, Mr. Sterling, and claimed my daughter contributed nothing to your success. Who do you think expedited your promotion to vice president 3 years ago? Who do you think approved your transfer to the Manhattan headquarters?" Caleb's eyes snapped open. "What?" "Sarah," Arthur said. "She believed in you. She asked me to give you a chance to shine. Every success you have had at Ascendant Global Caleb was a gift from the wife you are currently trying to destroy." The courtroom was dead silent. Even the stenographer had stopped typing for a second, mouth agape. Caleb felt a wave of nausea. His career, his reputation, his self-made empire. It was all a lie. He was a charity case. He was the very thing he accused Sarah of being. "Mr. Salling," Judge Grimshaw said, breaking the silence, "do you have any cross-examination for Mr. Bennett?" Salling looked at Arthur Bennett, then at the furious judge, and finally at his terrifyingly pale client. Salling knew when a ship was sinking. He also knew that angering Arthur Bennett could end his career in New York forever. "No questions, Your Honor," Salling whispered. "Good," Judge Grimshaw said. "Now, Mr. Miller, you mentioned undisclosed assets and fraudulent inducement regarding the prenup. Proceed." James Miller walked back to his table and picked up a thick, leather-bound binder. He dropped it onto the evidence table with a heavy thud. "Part 4, Your Honor," Miller said, looking at Caleb with a razor-sharp grin. "Let's talk about the Cayman Islands." Caleb tried to stand up. "This is ridiculous. My finances are a matter of public record. I have declared everything." "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," Judge Grimshaw barked, slamming his gavel, "or I will hold you in contempt so fast your head will spin." Caleb sank back into his chair. He looked at Salling. "Do something," he hissed. "Shut up." Salling hissed back, wiping sweat from his forehead. "If they have what I think they have, you're on your own, Caleb. I'm not getting disbarred for your stupidity." Miller opened the binder. He pulled out a series of projected slides, nodding to the bailiff to dim the lights. A screen descended behind the witness stand. "Exhibit A," Miller announced. A complex flowchart appeared on the screen. Mr. Sterling claimed in his deposition that his total liquid assets amounted to $400,000, largely tied up in 401k and stocks. "That's correct," Caleb muttered. "However," Miller continued, pointing a laser at the screen, "Mr. Sterling seems to have forgotten about a shell company registered in Panama called Blue Horizon Consulting. Does that name ring a bell, Caleb?" Caleb didn't answer. He couldn't breathe. Blue Horizon was supposed to be untraceable. He had paid a specialist $50,000 to bury that registration. Through a series of wire transfers disguised as vendor payments from his department at Ascendant Global, Miller explained Mr. Sterling has been funneling money into Blue Horizon. From there, the money was moved to an account in the Grand Cayman Islands. A bank statement appeared on the screen. It showed a balance of $450,000. The courtroom gasped. $10 million, Miller said. Hidden from his wife, hidden from the IRS, and most importantly, stolen from his employer. Miller turned to the judge. "You see, Your Honor, Caleb didn't earn this money. He didn't save it. He embezzled it. He approved false invoices for non-existent consulting work, paid the money to himself, and hid it offshore, planning to cash out once the divorce was finalized." Sarah spoke up for the first time. Her voice was soft, but in the quiet room it carried like a bell. "I tried to tell you, Caleb," she said. She wasn't looking at the screen. She was looking at him. "Last month when you came home late, smelling of her perfume, I asked you if we could go to counseling. I asked you if we could start over. I gave you one last chance to confess. To be honest." Caleb stared at her. You knew." "I'm the daughter of Arthur Bennett," she said simply. "I grew up reading ledgers. Did you really think I wouldn't notice when the household accounts didn't match your bonuses? Did you really think I wouldn't wonder why you were buying burner phones? I, Caleb stammered. "I hired a forensic accountant 6 months ago," Sarah said. "Mr. Miller isn't just a lawyer, Caleb. He's the head of Ascendant Global's internal audit division." Caleb whipped his head around to look at the shabby lawyer. Miller adjusted his glasses and smiled coldly. "Gotcha," Miller mouthed. Judge Grimshaw was flipping through the documents in the binder, his face turning redder by the second. "Mr. Salling," the judge said, his voice dangerously low, "were you aware that your client was hiding $10 million in embezzled funds while asking this court to leave his wife destitute?" "Absolutely not, Your Honor." Salling stood up so fast his chair tipped over. "I had no knowledge of this. I am withdrawing as counsel immediately. I will not suborn perjury." "You can't leave me," Caleb screamed, grabbing Salling's arm. Salling shook him off with disgust. "Get off me, you thief! You lied to the court. You lied to me. You're done." "Order," Judge Grimshaw shouted, banging the gavel repeatedly. "Mr. Sterling, you are in a world of trouble that goes far beyond divorce court. But before I make a ruling on the assets, there is the matter of the prenuptial agreement." Arthur Bennett leaned forward on the witness stand. The prenup, he rumbled. Miller flipped to a specific page in the binder. The prenuptial agreement, Caleb insisted on the one he drafted to protect his assets, contains a standard bad boy clause. Specifically, Section 9, Paragraph C. In the event of proven infidelity or commission of a felony crime involving moral turpitude, all asset protections are null and void, and the offending party forfeits their share of the marital estate. Miller closed the binder. Caleb brought his mistress, Jessica Vane, to company functions. Miller said, "We have photos. We have hotel receipts. We have the text messages where he mocked his wife. The infidelity is proven. The embezzlement is a felony. The prenup is void." Caleb looked around the room. The walls felt like they were closing in. He looked at the exit, wondering if he could run. But the two large security guards who had entered with Arthur Bennett were now standing in front of the doors, arms crossed. He was trapped. "So," Judge Grimshaw said, leaning back, "here is where we stand. The $10 million is frozen pending a criminal investigation. The prenup is void. This means we are back to a standard division of assets." "Actually, Your Honor," Sarah said, standing up. She walked around the table to stand in the center of the room. She looked tall, elegant, and powerful. "I don't want the money." Caleb blinked. "She doesn't want it." Hope flared in his chest. Maybe she's still soft. Maybe she still loves me. I don't need his stolen money. Sarah continued, her voice hardening. "I have my own. But I do want justice. And I want to make sure he never does this to another woman again." She turned to her father. "Dad, did you bring the file?" Arthur Bennett reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a slim blue folder. "I did." "What is that?" Caleb whispered, his throat dry. "This," Arthur said, holding up the folder, "is the termination of your employment at Ascendant Global effective immediately. It is also a civil lawsuit for the recovery of the $10 million plus damages." "And," Sarah added, "since you used the company car and the company apartment to facilitate your affair, those perks are revoked. Immediately." "You can't leave me homeless," Caleb cried out. "I have nowhere to go." "You have the Hamptons house," Salling shouted from the gallery, trying to distance himself. "He has the deed." "Ah," Arthur interrupted. "About the Hamptons house. Caleb, do you remember who sold you that property?" Caleb racked his brain. "Some LLC, Vanguard Properties." "I own Vanguard Properties," Arthur said with a savage grin. "And if you read the mortgage contract, which I know you didn't, because you're arrogant, you would know that the loan is callable immediately upon termination of your employment with Ascendant." Arthur dropped the folder on the railing. "I'm calling the loan, Caleb. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises." Caleb sank to his knees. The marble floor was cold. He had walked in here a millionaire. He had walked in here a vice president. He had walked in here a free man. Now he was unemployed, homeless, facing prison, and millions of dollars in debt to the most powerful man in New York. But the worst part wasn't the money. The worst part was looking at Sarah. She wasn't angry anymore. She looked at him with something far worse than hate. She looked at him with pity. "You celebrated too early, Caleb," she said softly. The doors to the courtroom burst open again. But it wasn't a witness this time. It was the district attorney. District Attorney Marcus Thorne did not look like a man who made idle house calls. He marched down the center aisle of the courtroom, flanked by 2 uniformed NYPD officers. He held a warrant in his hand, the paper crisp and terrifyingly official. "Caleb Sterling," Thorne announced, his voice booming off the wood-paneled walls. "You are under arrest." Caleb stumbled back, bumping into the defense table. On what grounds? Grand larceny, wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion." Thorne recited his tone, bored, as if he arrested pompous executives every Tuesday before lunch. "We've been tracking the Blue Horizon accounts for weeks, thanks to a tip from the Ascendant Global Audit team. We were just waiting for you to confirm under oath that you had sole control of your finances, which you just did. Thank you for making my job easy." One of the officers stepped forward, pulling Caleb's arms roughly behind his back. The metallic click-click of the handcuffs echoed through the silent room. It was a sound of finality. "This is a mistake," Caleb shouted, struggling as the cold steel bit into his wrists. He looked frantically at the gallery. Jessica, call my other lawyer. Call the firm." Jessica Vane was standing near the back row. She had been watching the proceedings with a look of growing horror, not for Caleb, but for her own proximity to the disaster. As Caleb called her name, the entire room turned to look at her. Sarah turned too. She looked at the young woman who had helped destroy her marriage. There was no anger in Sarah's eyes, only a cool assessment. "Jessica," Sarah said, her voice smooth. "Did he tell you about the offshore accounts? Because if you knew, that makes you an accessory to a federal crime." Jessica's eyes went wide. She looked at the district attorney, who was now eyeing her with interest. "I didn't know anything," Jessica shrieked, stepping back. She looked at Caleb with pure venom. "He lied to me. He told me he was a genius investor. He never told me he was stealing from his boss." "Jessica, baby, don't say that." Caleb pleaded, sweat pouring down his face. "We're in this together. We're going to Paris, remember?" "Paris!" Jessica laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You're going to prison, Caleb. I'm not going anywhere with you. I don't date losers, and I certainly don't date felons." She turned to the district attorney. "I'll cooperate. I have his texts. I have the emails he sent me about hiding the money. I'll give you everything if you keep me out of this." Caleb felt like he had been punched in the gut. "Jessica, you said you loved me." "I loved the penthouse, Caleb," she sneered, grabbing her purse. "Enjoy the cell." She stormed out of the courtroom, her heels clicking rapidly on the floor, leaving Caleb utterly alone. "Take him away," Judge Grimshaw ordered, waving his hand as if wafting away a bad smell. As the officers hauled Caleb toward the side exit, he dug his heels in. He needed one last look. He looked at Sarah. She was standing next to her father. Arthur Bennett had his hand on her shoulder, a protective, proud weight. Sarah looked radiant. The grey cardigan suddenly didn't look frumpy. It looked dignified. She looked like a queen who had just survived a coup. "Sarah," Caleb cried out, desperation cracking his voice. "Sarah, please, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. Don't let them take me. We can fix this." Sarah didn't speak. She simply reached into her purse and pulled out a small gold object. It was her wedding ring. She walked over to the defense table where Caleb had been sitting just moments before. She set the ring down on the wood with a gentle clink. "You can have this back," she said softly, though Caleb could hear her perfectly from the door. "Sell it. You're going to need the commissary money." The officers shoved Caleb through the door. The last thing he saw before the darkness of the holding cell corridor swallowed him was Sarah Bennett smiling at her father, finally free. 3 weeks later, the holding cell at the Metropolitan Detention Center was nothing like the master suite at the penthouse. It smelled of mildew, industrial cleaner, and human misery. The light was a constant buzzing fluorescent hum that made sleep impossible. Caleb sat on the edge of the thin metal bunk, his head in his hands. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. His expensive haircut had grown out, messy and greasy. The Rolex was gone, logged in an evidence bag somewhere in the city. "Sterling," a guard shouted, banging a baton against the bars. "Visitor, legal." Caleb's head snapped up, sallying. Did he come back? Or maybe Arthur Bennett decided to settle. He was marched down the hallway, shackled at the ankles to a small visitation room, divided by thick plexiglass. On the other side sat a man who looked even more tired than Caleb. He had a stack of files and a coffee stain on his shirt. It was his court-appointed public defender, a man named Gary Klein. Caleb sat down, picking up the phone receiver. "Get me out of here, Klein. I can't stay here another night. The guy in the next cell screams for 3 hours every morning." "We're working on bail, Caleb." Klein sighed, rubbing his eyes, but the judge denied the first motion. Flight risk, given the Cayman accounts. "So what's the plan?" Caleb demanded, trying to summon his old executive authority. "We fight the evidence, right? We claim entrapment. Arthur Bennett has a vendetta against me. We can use that." Klein looked at him with a mixture of pity and disbelief. "Caleb, listen to me. There is no fighting this. They have everything. The forensic audit from James Miller is flawless. The IP addresses from your computer match the transfers. And—" Klein hesitated. "And we have a new problem." "What?" "Jessica Vane." Caleb grit his teeth. "What about her?" "She made a deal yesterday," Klein said, opening a folder. "Full immunity in exchange for testimony. She handed over a burner phone you gave her. Apparently you recorded voice memos on it. Notes to yourself about how to structure the shell companies." Caleb slammed his fist against the ledge. "I was drunk. I was just brainstorming." "It's admissible," Klein said. "And it's damning. She also testified that you bragged about tricking Sarah Sterling into signing false tax returns. That adds a fraud charge against a spouse. Caleb, the DA, is looking for the maximum." "How long?" Caleb whispered. 15 to 20 years, Klein said quietly. "If we go to trial and lose, maybe 25. This is high profile. Arthur Bennett is making sure the press covers every inch of it. They want to make an example out of you." Caleb felt the room spin. 20 years. He would be almost 60 when he got out. His life was over. "But," Klein said, leaning in, "there is an offer on the table. An offer. Plead guilty to all charges. Allocate the remaining assets, the cars, the jewelry, the hidden cash to restitution for Ascendant Global. Do that, and the DA might recommend 12 years. With good behavior, you're out in 8. 8 years. It sounded like an eternity, but it was better than 20. "I have nothing left to give them," Caleb muttered. "They took the house. They took the accounts." "They want one more thing," Klein said. He slid a piece of paper against the glass. "They want a public allocution, an apology, specifically to Sarah Bennett." Caleb stared at the glass. "She wants me to beg. She wants the record set straight," Klein corrected. "She wants it publicly stated that her money was never the reason for your success, that you used her. It's a matter of reputation, Caleb. She's taking a board seat at Ascendant next month. She wants her slate clean." Caleb laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "So she's taking the throne. The princess becomes the queen." "Do you want the deal or not?" Klein asked, checking his watch. Caleb closed his eyes. He pictured the courtroom. He pictured Sarah's face. He remembered the way she used to look at him with adoration, bringing him coffee in bed, listening to his complaints about work. He had held a diamond in his hand and thrown it away for a handful of rhinestones. "I'll take the deal," Caleb whispered. Meanwhile in Manhattan, Sarah Bennett stood in the elevator of the Ascendant Global Tower. The doors slid open on the 50th floor, the executive suite. The office that used to belong to the vice president, Caleb's old office, was being cleared out. Movers were carrying out the sleek, modern furniture Caleb had insisted on buying with company funds. James Miller was standing by the window holding a tablet. He looked up as Sarah entered. He smiled a genuine, warm smile. "All clear, Ms. Bennett," James said. "The toxic assets have been removed, literally and figuratively." Sarah walked over to the window. The view of the city was breathtaking. She could see the park where she used to walk her dog alone while Caleb was working late. She could see the restaurant where he had proposed a proposal she now knew was a calculated business move. "Did he take the plea?" Sarah asked, not turning around. "He did," James said. 12 years. He signed the confession an hour ago. Sarah nodded slowly. She expected to feel triumphant. She expected to feel a rush of victory. But mostly she just felt light. The weight of 5 years of gaslighting, of feeling inadequate, of walking on eggshells. It was just gone. "My father wants to know if you're ready for the board meeting," James said. "They're waiting for you to chair the ethics committee." Sarah turned around. She smoothed the lapel of her navy blazer. Her eyes were bright and fierce. "I'm ready, James," she said. "But first there's one last loose end I need to tie up. One person I need to visit before I close this chapter completely." James looked confused. "Who, Jessica?" "No," Sarah said, walking toward the door. "Jessica is irrelevant. I'm going to see the only person in this mess who was as blind as I was." "Who is that?" "His mother," Sarah said. James's eyes widened. "Caleb's mother." "But she's in a nursing home in Queens. Caleb told everyone she died years ago." "Exactly," Sarah said, her voice steely. "He lied about that too. He hasn't paid her care bills in 6 months. They were about to evict her. I think it's time Mrs. Sterling found out exactly what kind of man she raised, and that she doesn't have to worry about rent anymore." Sarah walked out of the office, her heels striking the floor with a rhythm of purpose. The victim was gone. The survivor was gone. The CEO had arrived. The morning of the sentencing hearing did not bring the bright, hopeful sun that had graced the city the day Caleb Sterling walked into court believing he was a winner. Instead, New York was drowning in a relentless slate-gray downpour. Rain lashed against the high arched windows of the courthouse, creating a rhythmic drumming drone that seemed to vibrate through the heavy oak walls of Courtroom 4B. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. The air was thick with the scent of wet wool floor wax and the electric buzz of anticipation. This was no longer just a legal proceeding. It had become a spectacle. The public gallery, usually sparsely populated with bored retirees or anxious relatives, was standing room only. Reporters from the Financial Times, the Post, and the Chronicle jostled for position in the back rows, their pens poised to capture the final ruin of the man who had tried to swindle the Bennett empire. Former colleagues from Ascendant Global men and women Caleb had once fired, mocked, or ignored, lined the benches watching with a mixture of grim satisfaction and morbid curiosity. At the front of the room, seated behind the prosecution, sat Arthur Bennett. He was a statue of old-world power, his hands resting atop his cane, his eyes fixed on the empty defendant's chair. Beside him sat Sarah. She was a vision of stark contrast to the gloom outside. She wore a tailored white suit that seemed to absorb the dim light of the room and reflect it back with a soft, ethereal glow. Her posture was perfect, her face unreadable. She didn't look like a victim. She didn't look like a divorcee. She looked like justice personified. The side door opened with a heavy clank of metal. The room went silent save for the rain. Caleb Sterling shuffled in. The transformation was shocking. The man who had strutted into this same room weeks ago in a $3,000 bespoke suit was gone. In his place was a hollow shell, clad in an ill-fitting bright orange jumpsuit that hung loosely off his frame. His signature perfectly coiffed hair was now limp and graying at the temples. His face was gaunt, unshaven, and marked by the sleepless nights of the county lockup. He walked with his head down, avoiding the hundreds of eyes that bored into him, his gaze fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor. He reached the defense table and sank into the chair, the metal legs scraping harshly against the floor. His public defender, Gary Klein, offered him a nod that was more pity than professional courtesy. "All rise!" The bailiff bellowed, his voice cutting through the tension. The Honorable Judge Harold P. Grimshaw swept onto the bench. He looked even more severe than usual. He arranged his robes, adjusted his spectacles, and stared down at Caleb with the look a gardener might give a particularly stubborn weed. "Mr. Sterling," the judge began, his voice dry and authoritative, "we are here today for sentencing in the matter of the people versus Caleb Sterling. You have entered a plea of guilty to 1 count of grand larceny in the 1st degree, 1 count of tax fraud, and 1 count of spousal abandonment involving financial malice. These are serious crimes. They speak to a character that is deeply flawed, driven by avarice and a total disregard for the law." Caleb flinched at the words. "Under the terms of your plea agreement," Grimshaw continued, "you are required to make a statement of allocution. You may stand." Gary Klein nudged Caleb's elbow. "Stand up," he whispered. "Do it." Caleb pushed himself up. His legs felt like lead weights. He gripped the wooden podium, his knuckles turning white, trying to steady the trembling in his hands. He looked up, and for a fleeting second his eyes darted to the back of the room. He was looking for Jessica Vane. Part of him, the pathetic, delusional part, still hoped she might be there. Perhaps she would offer a look of regret. Perhaps she would be crying. But the back row was a sea of strangers. Jessica was gone. She was likely on a beach in Miami or sitting in a VIP booth in Los Angeles, spending the immunity deal she had purchased with his destruction. Caleb turned his gaze to the front row. He looked at Sarah. She met his eyes, and the lack of hatred in her gaze hurt more than any anger could have. She looked at him with the calm detachment of someone watching a stranger. "Mr. Sterling," the judge prompted. Caleb cleared his throat. It felt like swallowing broken glass. I stand here today to admit my crimes," he rasped. The microphone whined slightly, amplifying his broken voice. "I stole from Ascendant Global. I abused my position. I defrauded the state of New York." He paused, taking a ragged breath. The legal admission was the easy part. The next part was the price of his soul. "But my greatest crime," Caleb continued, his voice shaking, "was against my wife, Sarah." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Caleb didn't look away from her. "I stood in this courtroom a month ago and called her a burden," he said, the memory of his own arrogance making him nauseous. "I called her weak. I told this court she contributed nothing to my life. I was lying, not just to the court, but to myself." Tears began to blur his vision. Hot, stinging tears of genuine ruin. Sarah was the only reason I had anything. She supported me when I was a nobody in a cubicle. She believed in me when I was failing. She made a home for me when I deserved nothing. And when I finally succeeded, I repaid her loyalty with betrayal. I see now that the money I stole, the status I wanted, it wasn't worth a single day of the quiet life I had with her. I lost the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too busy looking at my own reflection. He lowered his head, his shoulders shaking. I am sorry, Sarah. I am so sorry. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the reporters stopped writing. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, Judge Grimshaw said. The judge's tone was softer now, but unyielding. Your remorse is noted for the record. However, remorse does not restitute $10 million, nor does it mend the trust you shattered. You bit the hand that fed you, and you broke the heart that loved you. Grimshaw picked up his gavel. I sentence you to a term of 12 years in a state correctional facility with eligibility for parole after 8 years. You are also ordered to pay restitution in the full amount of $10.4 million. You are remanded to custody immediately. Crack. The sound of the gavel was like a gunshot ending his life. 2 bailiffs moved in, grabbing Caleb by the arms to escort him out. As they turned him around, a voice cut through the air. Wait! It was soft, but it carried the weight of a command. Sarah Bennett stood up and walked to the wooden railing that separated the gallery from the court floor. The bailiffs hesitated, looking to the judge. Grimshaw gave a subtle nod, allowing it. Caleb stopped. He looked at her, a desperate, foolish spark of hope igniting in his chest. Sarah, he whispered. Sarah looked at him. Her expression was not one of forgiveness, but of closure. I had a meeting yesterday, Caleb. I went out to Queens. Caleb's blood ran cold. Queens. I visited the Sunnyvale Care Center, she said. Caleb felt the floor drop out from under him. My mother. Oh, God. Sarah, don't tell me. She's doing well. Sarah interrupted, her voice steady. She was confused, though. She didn't understand why her son hadn't visited in over a year. She thought you were on a long international business trip. That's what she told the nurses. Caleb hung his head, the shame burning his face. I stopped paying the bills. He confessed, his voice barely audible. I was so focused on the offshore accounts. I just stopped. I thought they had evicted her by now. I was too of a coward to check. They were going to evict her next week, Sarah said. She was going to be put in a state ward. Caleb closed his eyes, tears streaming down his cheeks. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You don't have to worry about it anymore, Sarah said. Caleb looked up confused. What? I paid the bill. Caleb, Sarah said simply. I paid the arrears for the last year, and I paid for her care for the next 10 years in advance. She's safe. She's not going anywhere. Caleb stared at her, his mouth slightly open, unable to process the level of grace standing before him. He had tried to steal her fortune. He had humiliated her publicly. He had cheated on her. And she had just saved the only other person he claimed to love. Why? He choked out. After everything I did to you, why would you help her? Sarah leaned in slightly, her hands gripping the railing. Her eyes were clear, fierce, and utterly devoid of malice. Because she's innocent, Caleb, Sarah said, and because, unlike you, I don't leave family behind, even when they don't deserve it. That is the difference between you and me. You think power is about what you can take. I know that power is about what you can give. She straightened up, smoothing her jacket. Goodbye, Caleb. Sarah, wait. Caleb lunged forward against the grip of the bailiffs. Thank you, Sarah, please. But she didn't look back. She turned and took her father's arm. Arthur Bennett cast one final withering look at the man in the orange jumpsuit, a look of total victory, before guiding his daughter toward the heavy double doors. The bailiff yanked Caleb's arm. "Let's go, Sterling. The bus is waiting." Caleb watched as the doors swung open. For a brief moment, the grey light of the hallway flooded in, framing Sarah in a halo of brightness. She stepped out into her future, a future of leadership, dignity, and freedom. The doors swung shut with a final thud, plunging the room back into shadow. Caleb Sterling turned and began the long walk toward the holding cell. He realized then with a crushing certainty that would haunt him for the next 12 years that he had spent his life chasing gold, only to realize he had been holding a diamond the entire time, and he had thrown it into the ocean. And that is how Caleb Sterling lost his fortune, his freedom, and the only woman who ever truly loved him, all in the span of a single court case. He thought he was playing a game of chess against a pawn, never realizing he was sitting across from the Queen. It's a harsh reminder that true wealth isn't what you have in the bank, it's who you have in your corner. And if you betray that person for a quick payday, you might just find yourself paying a price no amount of money can cover. Sarah proved that the best revenge isn't screaming or fighting. It's simply being successful, kind, and letting the trash take itself out. Wow, what a roller coaster. I honestly got chills when Sarah revealed she paid for his mother's care. That is the ultimate power move. What did you guys think? Do you think Caleb deserved 12 years, or should it have been longer? And would you have helped his mother after everything he did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We post new dramas every week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.